The United States, a young nation with a history of nearly 250 years of existence, has rapidly risen to become the world's leading superpower. To achieve this accomplishment, it required outstanding figures, talented individuals with far-reaching vision to steer the country through countless challenges. Among them, the office of the presidency stands out as a position of paramount importance, representing more than just power. The person chosen to occupy this office also clearly embodies the hopes and aspirations of the American people. The success or failure of presidential terms is determined by challenges and crises, by the burden of the past, and by a vision for the future. 45 extraordinary individuals, across 46 terms, have left a profound impact on the miraculous development of the United States. In this video, let us join Spiderum to explore the 4 prominent presidents who shaped the history of the United States of America. The first president was none other than George Washington, the President of Precedents. On April 30th, 1789, the Revolutionary hero General George Washington took the oath of office to become the first president of the United States. While most nations lived under monarchies, the drafters of the American Constitution chose a democracy, with the creation of the presidency. This was the first time in the entire world that this office had appeared. The delegates were generally inclined toward the idea of Congress holding more power than this presidential position, as they did not want power concentrated in and dependent on a single person. In that context, George Washington emerged as a suitable candidate because everyone knew he did not cling to power. Previously, after winning the Revolutionary War, Washington had resigned as commander-in-chief and disbanded his army. His willingness to relinquish power was the greatest reason George Washington became the first president of the United States. During this first term, nearly every decision George Washington made carried special significance, establishing precedents for future presidents. He established the cabinet to build a solid foundation for the structure of the new government, an initiative that American presidents continue to apply to this day. Notably, instead of choosing acquaintances and close confidants, George Washington prioritized assembling a cabinet with the most outstanding figures on the political scene. Thomas Jefferson was appointed Secretary of State. Alexander Hamilton took charge as Secretary of the Treasury. The position of Secretary of War belonged to General Henry Knox, and the office of Attorney General was assumed by Edmund Jennings Randolph. In addition, George Washington shaped the relationship between the President and Congress. He ensured that the executive branch remained separate from the legislative body. Thanks to this, transparency was enhanced, and there was no opportunity for the abuse of power or tyranny to emerge. George Washington also exercised the veto power in April 1792 regarding the apportionment of seats in the House of Representatives. Throughout his 2 presidential terms, Washington only exercised his veto power one other time, on a bill related to the military. In July 1794, farmers in western Pennsylvania refused to pay taxes and rose up to launch the Whiskey Rebellion. This was viewed as a major threat to the existence of the government. However, taking up arms against one's own citizens was a path that could lead to tyranny. If he overreacted, riots could break out across the entire United States. George Washington was well aware of this danger. He personally mobilized more than 12,000 troops to Pennsylvania. But instead of violence, he won over the people there with his prestige and tact. The rebellion was suppressed without a single shot being fired. It can be said that George Washington skillfully found a balance between demonstrating the authority of the president and the federal government, while simultaneously avoiding the image of an authoritarian and tyrannical leader. Alongside important domestic policies, George Washington also demonstrated a profound vision in shaping foreign policy. In 1793, he resolutely kept the United States out of the ongoing conflict between Great Britain and France to protect the young nation's independence. This decision received considerable pressure and criticism at the time. Nevertheless, it became one of the longest-lasting precedents in American history, staying out of European conflicts. Through this, George Washington also established an early precedent regarding the crucial role of the president in formulating foreign policy. Of all the precedents George Washington set, the most important was not how he exercised power, but how he relinquished it. In 1796, Washington decided to retire after 2 terms as president and refused to serve a 3rd term. It may seem like a normal occurrence in the United States today, but in reality, George Washington's resignation after 2 terms shaped the survival of democracy in the land of the free in many ways. For 144 years, presidents upheld this tradition, with only one exceptional case serving more than 2 terms, which will be mentioned later. George Washington left a monumental legacy for American history. To this day, the title Father of his Country is still used to commemorate his contributions to the United States. George Washington's face appears on the $1 bill and the 25-cent coin, while dozens of schools, towns, and famous landmarks, most notably the capital of the United States, have been named after the first president in history, Thomas Jefferson. The president who doubled the size of the United States is known as the primary author of the American Declaration of Independence. He was actually the 3rd president in American history, succeeding George Washington and John Adams. Following a highly tense election in 1800, he won the presidency and became the first person to take office in the new capital of Washington, although D.C. During his time in office, Thomas Jefferson focused on strengthening the new economy. He significantly reduced the national debt by cutting the military budget and government spending. In particular, Thomas Jefferson's greatest legacy was the Louisiana Purchase from France in 1803 for $15 million at the time, which is equivalent to more than $400 million today. With this, the United States acquired an additional 820,000 square miles of land west of the Mississippi River, thereby doubling the total area of the nation. There would be no United States of America today without this extraordinary land transaction by Thomas Jefferson. Essentially, what he purchased was the middle section of the United States. This was seen as a massive treasure trove of oil, timber, arable land, and many other resources, all of which propelled the United States from a tiny player in the global economy to a superpower that astonished all of Europe. But this purchase by Thomas Jefferson also came with a heavy price that went beyond money. With the acquisition of Louisiana, agriculture flourished, leading to an increase in the demand for slave labor. From this point, the clear division between the North and the South, between freedom and slavery, set the stage for a bloody civil war. Returning to President Jefferson's 2nd term, he attempted to maintain American neutrality in the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. However, after Great Britain and France, which were at war, began harassing American merchant ships, Jefferson implemented the Embargo Act of 1807, forcing United States ports to close to foreign trade. This resulted in severe damage to the American economy and sparked fierce public opposition. Jefferson's misguided act was subsequently repealed before he left office in 1809. Nevertheless, Jefferson remains one of the prominent presidents who helped shape the America of today. Indeed, his face is carved on the legendary Mount Rushmore. Abraham Lincoln, the President of Freedom and Unity. is another president whose face is carved on Mount Rushmore. His name began to rise to prominence in 1858 when Abraham Lincoln participated in the famous debates with Stephen Douglas on the issue of slavery. These debates helped Lincoln capture public attention and laid the foundation for his subsequent political career. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln became the 16th President of the United States and the first president from the Republican Party. Shortly thereafter, the Southern states began to secede from the Union, and a bloody, devastating civil war officially commenced. During this difficult period, Abraham Lincoln steered the Northern Union in the right direction through crucial decisions, most notably the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. This was a historic document that transformed the meaning of the American Civil War and turned the Union forces into an army of liberation. A few years later, Abraham Lincoln played a major role in helping the 13th Amendment to the Constitution pass, which outlawed slavery across the entire United States. Another memorable Civil War achievement of Abraham Lincoln was the Gettysburg Address on November 19, 1863. He delivered a brief speech of only 272 words at the dedication of the new National Cemetery at Gettysburg. Widely published, the Gettysburg Address eloquently articulated the purpose of the war, thereby emphasizing the noble goal of an equal and free America. The Gettysburg Address became one of the most famous speeches in American history. The Civil War finally ended in 1865. Abraham Lincoln was eager for reforms to help the South and the entire country rebuild. One of these efforts was the passage of the Pacific Railway Act, which laid the foundation for the construction of the transcontinental railroad system. This project created an east-west connection for the first time, contributing to a new era of development for a unified America. However, Abraham Lincoln did not live to see the final results. On April 14, 1865, he was assassinated at Ford's Theater in Washington by John Wilkes Booth, an actor and Southern sympathizer. Lincoln's death shocked the nation and left a profound sense of grief among the American people. To commemorate the great president, on April 21, 1865, a special train carrying Lincoln's body departed on a journey through 180 cities and 7 states to return him to his home in Illinois. This journey became one of the largest memorial events in American history, expressing the deep affection and respect of the people for the president who dedicated his entire life to the unity and freedom of the United States. To this day, there are still many hypotheses about what America would have been like if Abraham Lincoln had not been assassinated and had continued as president. Whether the process of reunification and reconstruction would have occurred more peacefully, or if the scourge of racism would have ended sooner. However, history never repeats itself, and these hypotheses will forever remain unsolved mysteries. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 4-term president, was the longest-serving president in United States history, serving 4 consecutive terms. He steered the country through a severe economic crisis, only to face World War II. Not only that, despite his physical challenges, President Franklin D. Roosevelt inspired America with courage and a fearless spirit to rise above adversity. Born into a wealthy family, Roosevelt's education and development were relatively smooth, following the example of his 5th cousin, President Theodore Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt entered politics as a Democrat. It was at this point that an unexpected event occurred. In 1921, the 39-year-old Franklin Roosevelt contracted polio. This terrible disease left him paralyzed from the waist down. It seemed his political career would have to end. But Franklin Roosevelt's resilient will would not allow this to happen. With the support of his wife, Eleanor, Franklin Roosevelt gradually recovered and returned to public life after nearly 10 years. In November 1932, Franklin became the 32nd President of the United States. In his inaugural address, he delivered the famous line, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." The time Franklin Roosevelt took office coincided with the largest financial crisis the United States had ever faced. The unemployment rate stood at 25%. Banks were closed across the country, and more than 2 million people were left homeless. In his first 100 days, the new president proposed that Congress pass reform legislation. He also frequently spoke on national radio through a program called the Fireside Chats. More than 60 million viewers listened to these broadcasts. And through them, Franklin D. Roosevelt restored the people's trust. Most prominent among Franklin D. Roosevelt's efforts to rebuild the country was the New Deal economic policy. It provided economic relief packages to workers and farmers, created jobs for the unemployed, and introduced a series of important reforms to the financial system. Consequently, the economy gradually recovered. This positive outcome helped Franklin D. Roosevelt win the trust of voters, allowing him to easily win re-election with a landslide victory. During his second term, the United States economy continued its recovery, but support for the New Deal gradually weakened. Nevertheless, Franklin Roosevelt broke tradition and ran for a third term for a special reason. World War II broke out in September 1939. President Roosevelt continued to pursue America's traditional policy of remaining separate from the intense conflicts in Europe. In this extraordinary context, the American people did not want to change presidents, as they needed stability in the face of the storms ahead. Thus, in 1940, Franklin D. Roosevelt broke all previous precedents and became the first president to be re-elected to 3 terms. On December 7, 1941, more than 350 Japanese fighter planes launched a surprise attack on the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. About 3,000 people were killed. Immediately, the United States declared war on Japan and the Axis powers. President Franklin D. Roosevelt led the United States at the forefront of the Allies to secure major advantages on the battlefield. As the war neared its end, Roosevelt was re-elected to a 4th presidential term in November 1944. However, he did not have the opportunity to witness the final victory he had built. On April 12, 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt passed away from a cerebral hemorrhage, with less than 1 month remaining before the war in Europe ended. Even so, what Franklin D. Roosevelt left behind for the United States was truly monumental. He is always regarded as one of the finest presidents to have shaped the history of the United States. Biographer Gene Edward Smith wrote of Franklin D. Roosevelt, "He lifted himself from his wheelchair to lift the nation from its knees." Thus, we have just looked back at the profiles of the 4 presidents who made major contributions and shaped the history of the United States. Which president impressed you the most? Of course, the United States is always transforming and developing. Let us wait and see the surprising and interesting developments in the United States presidential election taking place at the end of this year between the 2 candidates, Donald Trump and advocacy of Kamala Harris. In your opinion, who will win to bring about breakthrough innovations and write their name among the ranks of the great presidents? Please share your thoughts and discuss in the comments below. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos.